So, good afternoon, Bula. Very happy to have a room full for our discussion this afternoon. This is a UN system side event, and one of the constant challenges that the UN is facing is really working together. This is like in real life when you have many people trying to come together and work together. But how strongly we make an effort is something that you see by this side event, which is organized by IFAD, by the International Organization for Migration, by UNESCO, by UN Women, the World Food Programme, and FAO all together. And we bring you the bundled expertise of these organizations, and we, more importantly, bring you fantastic panelists, which I'm going to introduce you as I give them the floor. Let me introduce myself. My name is Martin Frick. I'm brand new with the UN Secretariat for the Climate Change Convention. I have been working with FAO before in the last 2.5 years. Now with UNFCCC, I'm responsible for basically all the implementation and climate action side of the Secretariat. And I come to the Secretariat with the impression of 2.5 years in the food sector, and which have turned me into a true believer into the sector and made me understand how centrally important it is. We're all following in the news the daily messages about climate-related disaster, which are becoming stronger and stronger, and we see the impacts of those worldwide. There is not one area in the world which wouldn't be affected. However, wherever you look in the world, agriculture is always amongst the sectors which are most affected. And just to give you a number, if you look at the damages caused by droughts, not surprisingly, 80% of these damages are born in the agriculture sectors. Well, we know that agriculture is, of course, most vulnerable. And let me say that the poorer a farmer is, the more vulnerable you are to the impacts of climate change because you are lacking the coping capacities. But at the same time, agriculture has a tremendous potential not only to address the issues of food security, which is certainly a given, but also to make an entire society more resilient to the impacts of climate change, and also to contribute massively to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and to the re-establishment of the natural carbon balance, which has made our life possible. But before I go on, which is actually the role of our negotiators, let me introduce Tanya Oseyo to you, who is sitting next to me. Tanya is working with the World Food Programme. We've been doing a lot of events together over the last 2.5 years. Tanya can give you an overview of the topic, but also of the cooperation of the UN organizations. And before I give Tanya the floor, there is a big clock in the background, and we've been informed that we have 90 minutes sharp, 5 minutes overtime. After 5 minutes overtime, the microphone go out. So I will try to keep my remarks short. I will ask my panelists to have short and punchy remarks, so we have as much time as possible to give you the floor, listening to your questions and hopefully even answering them. But with that, Tanya, I hand over to you to your introductory remarks, please.
Okay, thank you so much, Martin. Good afternoon, everyone, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to me to welcome you on behalf of the organizing partners, FAO, IFAD, WFP, UN Women, IMO, and UNESCO to this side event on climate action for food security, harvesting, adaptation, and mitigation benefits in the land sector. We would like to also take the opportunity to thank the government of Fiji and also Germany for hosting us here in Bonn. We would also like to express our gratitude to the honorable panelists who have taken the time to be part of this dialogue. We greatly value the strong partnerships with your respective nations as well organizations who speak with one voice when it comes to climate change, land use, food security, and nutrition. The conversation that we would like to facilitate here today is an urgent one. After steadily declining for over a decade, global hunger is again on the rise, affecting 11% of the global population. This is a difficult truth announced this year in the report of the state of food security and nutrition in the world. The estimated numbers of undernourished people increases from 775 millions in 2015 to 815 millions in 2016. In this context, climate change is identified as one of the factors driving this recent increase and poses major threat to food security and to the global to the goal to eliminate hunger by 2030, as described in the second Sustainable Development Goal. Already now, changing weather and precipitation patterns threats food security and livelihoods of millions of people. The world has observed how the frequency of extreme weather events have increased to almost twice in comparison to the last decade. Those events have forced some 26 million people into poverty every year, and the economic losses of those extreme weather events are rising rapidly, representing about $141 billion per year on average. In addition, over the past 10 years, the number of violent conflicts around the world has increased significantly, in particular in countries already facing food insecurity and high level of environmental degradation. The food security situation is getting worse in part of sub-Saharan Africa, Southeastern and Western Asia, most notable in situations of conflict, in particular where the food security impacts of conflict were compounded by droughts or floods, like in parts related to the El Niño phenomenon and the climate-related shocks. It is of great importance to highlight that both hunger and climate change fuel migration. People leave their homes to escape hunger, poverty, and conflict. People are displaced by extreme weather events. A large share of these immigrants come from rural areas where more than 3/4 of the world's poor depend on agriculture and natural resource-based livelihood. With the demand by 2050 to feed an estimated population of 9.7 billion, effective climate action in the land sector is required to simultaneously address climate change, mitigation, and adaptation, and contribute to both the achievement of the Paris Agreement and the Agenda 2030. There are several initiatives, and the most important, there are partnerships that are working together toward this aim, recognizing that comprehensive integrated strategies are required to promote transformation in the land sector, incentivize the rural sector, and enhance resilient capability of the most vulnerable food insecure populations around the world. In short, climate action must be taken into account, for instance, better scientific information to inform decision-making, a transformation of our agricultural system, rural economies, and natural resource management practices to ensure and secure a healthy future for all of the people and the entire planet. Innovative models of land use for growth, employment, and more highly performing systems will inform the backbone of more diverse, sustainable, and resilient food systems that they successfully combine mitigation and adaptation benefits. The importance of climate justice, gender, equality, and the strong human rights foundations to fight against climate change and engage stakeholders in action. Significance of sound monitoring as part of the global stock-taking exercise, and the need to build capacities to support the generation better data on the feasibility of climate risk management. Of course, it is not only our event putting these major challenges on the table. I would like to highlight that the high-level roundtable discussion on climate action for zero hunger on November 14 will discuss further the challenge and opportunities to meet the second sustainable goal of eradicating hunger in conjunction to ensuring sustainable agricultural development, addressing climate change, and eradicating poverty. But for now, without further ado, I would like to yield the floor back to our moderator and distinguished panel, who will provide deeper insights from the individual perspective into some of the major themes I have outlined. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Tanya, and particularly for setting the stage on the social ramifications that agriculture has. I think it's already clear with the composition of this panel that you will see in a minute, but also from Tanya's introductory remarks, that agriculture is so much more than just a technical issue. It's in many places of the world really what holds a society together, and the failure of agriculture is one of the main triggers of migration. I'm very happy looping this action space and bond zone to the Bula zone and to the negotiations to welcome Tekimi Nakimdakida, who is negotiating on behalf of the government on Fiji on a range of issues, including agriculture. And I would like to express my thanks to the government of Fiji to having really brought in the questions of food security and agriculture so strongly in the negotiations. Tekini, you're yourself a crop researcher and expert on resilience in crops. Where would you see opportunities for climate resilient development? What are the signals? What are the energy that the negotiations can transport to really make transformation in agriculture happening? Tekimi, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, moderator and panelists and colleagues as an agriculture family. It is indeed a pleasure to be invited yesterday to be part of this panel regarding harvesting and adaptation and mitigation benefits. Coming into Bonn, Fiji has been staggering in terms of agriculture after the experience of Cyclone Winston in 2016. Still now we are trying to recover, and so all those climate change induced disasters and effects affect the population and livelihood of people in small island states and who are in the forefront of climate change effects. I think for us the opportunity lies in for climate resilient agriculture. As an agronomist, I've tried hard to promote adaptation measures for our farmers in the Fiji Islands. Most importantly, we would like to see immediate developments in the case of integrated technology for climate change induced pest and diseases damage. So populations have been forced to migrate due to rising sea levels, due to land degradation. So their daily schedules or daily activities or livelihood will change. Not only will they move, also pests and diseases move along with this migration. So it is something that we would try to curb as we try amidst all these climate change effects. Second would be marginal land restoration. Right now there's areas in Fiji that is experiencing months of dry spell. And all this that is happening started maybe like a decade ago. Frequency of disasters in the islands. When I talk about Fiji, it includes all the Pacific Island countries. We were struck constantly by disasters, cyclones. And this is becoming the norm of our lives every day, every year. So restoration of marginal land, we hope that we can restore all the marginal lands that has been degraded from monocropping, from intensive fertilizer use, from erosion. Farming groups and small working groups have started to reforest lands. And we are thankful that we are here in Bonn. We can negotiate issues at this level. But on the ground, we have started to move. So trying to adapt and be resilient in this very important industry, which is agriculture, because it's also responsible for our food security. And the last immediate action we would like to see is through capacity building. Capacity building of not only the service providers, but also our farmers who till the land and work on the ground, is that they have to accept the changes that are coming. Change is hard, but it's inevitable. Because of this, I think here in Bonn, we've already been negotiating and hopefully whatever the elements that I've mentioned has also been included in a draft text that we've submitted. And we are hopeful that we are able to get a decision on agriculture submission, which would be benefit to the whole citizens of this group. So with that, we are hoping to get elements of soil health, nutrient use efficiency, socioeconomic and gender, which are all merged together in the submission for agriculture in the subsidiary body for scientific and technical advice. I'll stop there. Thank you very much, Frick.
Thank you very much. I'm particularly grateful that you brought up the question of restoring degraded land. It's one of these agenda items that tend to be neglected in international fora, and we must not forget that more than 50% of the Earth's land are already degraded, and we continue to lose arable land on a staggering scale. The size of Switzerland, including the mountains, are lost in agriculture every single year. And reversing that, of course, is not only supporting food security, it's also creating livelihoods, it's creating jobs, it's a prevention measure for migration, and not least, it's an enormous possibility to sequester carbon. And very encouraged to hear that the ag negotiations are going forward, and we're hoping that there's also a signal coming from the room here. But let me now go from the highest level of political decision-making to the reality on the ground, on the grassroots level. Our next speaker, Divine Nitiokam, is the founder and managing director of the Climate Smart Agriculture Youth Network. Divine has been working for 15 years as a youth advocate. So I think you started when you were 2 years old. And has been bringing the perspective of young people and their needs into international fora like this one. What we would like to learn from you, Divine, is what support do particularly young farmers need to change the system, to bring the transformation which is so direly needed in agriculture. Divine, you got the floor. Be reminded 4 minutes for every speaker. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, the entire UN systems, for giving me this opportunity to actually share what we've been doing and my experience as well, as far as young people or youth engagement in achieving the SDG, as well as the Agenda 2030 or 63 is concerned. So as Martin earlier said, I'm the founder for CSAYN. This is really a great space for us to underscore what us as young people we want to ensure that the 2030 agenda is fully achieved, especially SDG 2, which is zero hunger. Yeah, going straight to your question, what do young farmers need to ensure that the future is sustainable and ensuring that everybody is involved, ensuring that no one is left behind? We are at the level of CSAYN. We came up with 12 flagship programs. Of course, we are a voluntary organization or network whereby we are right now present in 30 countries, African countries. We've been very much advocating in ensuring that agriculture, climate, and food security nexus is fully integrated in the 2030 agenda. And in 2014, we were able to sign the Zero Hunger Challenge Pledge, the UN SDG program, which was actually endorsed by some of the other UN agencies in the various countries where we operate. So to answer the question, the first support we need, I won't start with funding because you may have funding, but if you don't have the idea, nothing's going to happen. So we need the capacity. Young people, we need capacity at all levels. We need capacity development, capacity building, and equally an enabling environment. Because few weeks back, when I was at the AUC trying to speak to the parliamentarians, I said, I mean, when you go back home, are you pledging to say you're going to agree with these young people coming to meet you in your various offices? They say yes, and of course, that's why we've been able to reach out to many countries as possible. So the second thing we need is actually the space, and I'm happy IFAD was able to fund us to sponsor 6 of my team members across the continent to come for the COP, to share the best practices, to see how much we can equally engage with the various stakeholders and equally policymakers at the highest level. So I think that getting this space frequently is going to help us. But the most important thing to do is at the grassroots level. Looking at the Agenda 2030, we've been able to translate the SDGs into 60 local languages on voluntary basis. Because we came up together and realized that the UN has 6 official languages. What about the grassroots? Those who don't have access to internet, how are they going to be fully involved in the SDG? I mean, to ensure that we leave no one behind, we said, let's translate these SDGs into local languages. So I really feel that this is a huge opportunity for us. And if the first, second, and third content or ideas or proposal are met, then the last thing comes now to funding, because if we have the capacity, we've been trying to see with some donors how to come up with bankable projects. But again, as I said, we really need some of the technical efforts and expertise to go through this. And again, to sum up, we are young people are very innovative. They are very, very innovative. And we think this platform given to us is going to help us push the Agenda 2030 and ensuring no one is left behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Divine. I said at the outset, this is a UN system side event, and while UN Volunteers is not a part of the organization team, I feel inclined just to mention that one of the things the UN Volunteers, who are based here in Bonn as well, are offering for free is translation services in about every language you can possibly imagine, and maybe that can help addressing what you just mentioned about getting the message out to the people. I'm happy to welcome Hindu Amaru Ibrahim, who just joined us. Hindu is from the Mboro pastoralist community of Chad and is an indigenous leader. And what I would like to ask you, Hindu, is what role do you see for indigenous communities who in many instances have basically shown how sustainable living works for a very long time? How do you see the role of indigenous peoples in that context? You have the floor, please. 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitations. Actually, as indigenous peoples, everybody know that our life and livelihood are linking to the environment and what environment giving us. And this environment is including the land, what is the most important part who is producing food for us. If we are indigenous or non-indigenous person, we need food in order to get survive. So for indigenous peoples and the climate change, what we are asking, it's food security, sure, but food sovereignty. How we can have this diversity in our sovereignty, because we are feeding millions of the peoples around the world, and we are producing for our own community in order to mitigate the food security. So in this negotiation, of course, like agriculture have been marginalized for a long time. And then we know that climate change is really linked with it, but it's not the priority of everybody. So how like those countries or those peoples who have the priorities on food security, food sovereignty, and also nutrition, that's really very important to be taken part. Like FAO is one of the UN organizations doing a lot of work on it. Then we have the FAO guideline on the 10-year guideline, with the voluntary documents best for all the countries who's supposed to use it in order to fulfill the right to land. So that must be like one best document who should be taken into consideration in this climate negotiation as a UN voluntary documents, and then as a base for implementation, because now we are talking about the Paris Agreement implementation, not the negotiations. So how this can be included on the all NDCs, all NAPs, NAPA, NAMA, all the plan programs, and then indigenous peoples can identify themselves once these documents are considered. So for us, right to land tenure is the most important, who can give people sovereignty in order to protect and produce a lot in their own land. And the second thing that we are asking is how those communities can be here. Because you produce the food, you do not here, then the market system become like more complicated to get in. I'm coming from Africa, I'm coming from the Sahel regions. And then in these regions, we have a lot of issue on accessing to food. So people's putting the subject differently. I'm happy that my brother from the young organization talked about the SDGs. So how we can tackle all the subjects together, that's give us like one objective to achieve the sustainability, to fight climate change, and then to have the better future in the equal way. So as indigenous peoples, justice, rights are based on access to the resources equally for everyone. And if we have the equal access, we can get to the food, we can have land, and then we can start resolving our issues one by one. So as it's a UN panel, if I can use these opportunities, I mean how the UN organizations can come all together as cross-cutting issues to work on this climate change and food. We are saying in our indigenous peoples, land forest is our supermarket. How we can protect this supermarket to do not increase the funding, because we cannot protect all the 7-9 billion peoples because food are increasing. So we need to keep this one, and we can have it if all the UN agencies come together and work and put that as a priority issues for the peoples. And then those peoples have voice to say something. And that can help us to save time and then to resolve many things. And just I'm ending by saying indigenous peoples are ready to work with all the peoples who have to respect, protect, and promote our rights, and then sharing the natural resources. And it has to be right-based approach. We have these documents who allow us to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hindu. And I think you gave the perfect introduction to the lady who is just sitting next to you, which is Katra Ayuyo, who has been working on human rights, women's rights, and questions of economic and social justice since 14 years, and particularly on the question of gender and land tenure. And so I don't need to do a big introduction, Katja, to give you the floor and share the experiences, just building up on what Hindu just said. Katja.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for the great introduction to the theme I'm going to speak. That would be a challenge to beat the contextualization. So I will speak mostly from the perspective of the role of land rights, specifically in particular to rural women in the context of climate change adaptation, mitigation, and agricultural sectors. So it is widely recognized both that rural women and girls are sustained by agriculture and natural resources. According to ILO, agriculture remains the most important source of employment for women in low income and lower middle income countries, relegating women to time and labor intensive activities which are unpaid or poorly remunerated. At the same time, rural women face many challenges due to the rapid climate change conditions, as it has been shared here, and moderating severe impacts of droughts alone is striking 52% of agricultural land. So these are the land that the rural women depend on to live. And in that sense, women's land rights to agricultural land, it's really a matter of sustaining the livelihood and overall survival. Some studies show that linkages between climate change mitigation and women tenure rights are especially strong for rural women who practice community-based tenure. In these settings, women commonly rely on community lands in order to fulfill responsibilities that are essential to their communities' livelihoods, cultural integrity, and ability to sustainably steward community forests that hold at least 24% of the above-ground carbon found in the world's tropical forests, a sum equivalent to almost 4 times the global greenhouse gas emissions of 2014. So transformative actions really has to look upon challenge the structural barriers for women to rural women continue to sustain their livelihood and increase their economic empowerment, but also the role that they play in that sector. So we can really see and suggest policies and frameworks that look in 2 ways. Look at the role of women and giving them the rights they deserve in be meaningfully participating on the decision-making of land use and management, natural resource use and management, but also building that structure to go with it so they can exercise the rightfully role in that sector. At the same time, we see the studies that we have done, we notice that the rights to land results also in practice that help mitigation and adaptation efforts from a broad range of interventions that women are leading and are implementing, such as intercropping, crop rotation, agroforestry, tree planting, terracing. All of those are important and in supporting, promoting climate mitigation, climate adaptation. But in the programming and the efforts that are designing those usually are lacking the recognition of women's roles in that arena. When it comes to the role of women's land rights, those positive effects may be increased. Women tend to be more receptive of those innovations, and in particular if they have the access to information and to the technology. On the other hand, climate change increases the hardships and disadvantages women already face. We see that the effects of the land degradation that affects 1.5 billion people worldwide gravely affect women disproportionately. And when we look at the enabling possibility of secure land rights that they can have, a 2007 comprehensive literature review that strong evidence from relationship between women's land rights and bargaining power in decision-making on consumption and human capital investment and on intergenerational transfers. These findings have significant gender-based implications regarding incentives to invest in conservation and on the prevention, rehabilitation, and restoration of degraded land. Where land rights are insecure, in contrast, smallholder farmers lack resources and incentives to invest in the adaptations that improve the productivity of their land in the face of the changing climate conditions. Such mitigating agriculture techniques and investments can include soil conservation and augmentation, terracing, tree planting, and buffer zones. As the Chief of Office of the UNCCD recently summarized, land tenure policies are key to address land degradation. When we look at the disproportion of women that are affected by those issues, we perceive that unequal power relations and gender-based discrimination in statutory and customary tenure system in many societies deny women even the user rights to plant trees, control soil degradation, and enhance soil fertility, which are key contributions and key interventions that women are leading and the women are contributing to mitigation and adaptation. Unlike men, women are also often have less access to information, resources, and the legal rights to their land. For rural women, especially those who are farmers, are particularly affected because their land rights are often more tenuous than those of their male counterparts and may be sidelined and demand for land increases. In other words, weak legal and social legitimacy of their land rights put them at risk. They face inequitable laws, both formal and customary. They often suffer from discriminatory land transfer practices. The land rights are often tied to the male relative, and as a result, in the case of widowhood, divorce, or a husband moving away from the village, women risk losing their entitlements. Rural women are also often excluded from decision-making around land and natural resources, even though they hold critical knowledge, and also they exert successful climate change responses and programming. They are excluded for the decision-making at all levels. In addition, women are less likely to migrate in search of work, especially women in the rural area. They usually are left behind, and they stay, meaning to do the caring of the children and the elderly and family members, as well as managing the land, but they are doing it without the legal rights that allow them to make the decisions, leveraging the land and the collateral that can be used. And access also the agricultural inputs that would help them keep the land productive. They are more likely than men to suffer from malnutrition when food is scarce due to lower crop yields as a result of drought or degraded soil. And these disadvantages are very much entrenched without the climate change compounding factor. Finally, I would just say that the essential role and use of the land are too often inadequately considered when it comes to understanding and recognizing the role of women in interventions of mitigation and adaptation. So with secure land rights, some of our studies have over and over again shown that women farmers are more likely to increase crop yields, conserve soil, plant more trees, and by and large, improve large-scale mitigation efforts. So I will stop here.
Thank you very much. Two things that I would like just to briefly emphasize. Again, land restoration, but what I very much appreciate, not only the perspective that women are suffering most from land restoration, which is absolutely the case, but the huge agency and the potential that empowerment of women has to restore lands and reap benefits in the agricultural world. There was a report some years back that made headlines emphasizing that if women would be given the same rights like men, productivity in agriculture could be substantially going up. Now I might want to add that it's going substantially up without increasing the environmental footprint, and that makes empowerment of women a low-hanging fruit in the climate change world. Now, to our next panelist, Juan Zhang is here to represent the Green Climate Fund. And the Green Climate Fund is all about transition, it's all about country-drivenness, and it's also about risk-taking, because if you change the paradigm, if you basically want to work on transformation, business as usual is not what's working. And so my question to Juan, who has more than 17 years of experience in financing and in environmental finance, is what is your perspective? What is the Green Climate Fund perspectives on transformation in agriculture? How does that look like? What does it need? Juan, you have the floor. Please be reminded 4 minutes so we have enough time for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and challenging 4 minutes for such a deep question. Maybe I can share how GCF works, and then I will try to capture that question. So GCF has a mandate to operate or to allocate funds in mitigation and adaptation 50%, 50%. And in regards to this particular event, there are several priority areas within these two focus of work of the GCF. In mitigation, one of the priorities sustainable land use and forest management. And in adaptation, we have enhanced livelihoods, increased health and food and water security, as well as resilient ecosystems. So land use sector and food security is a key and a priority for the Green Climate Fund. So far, the GCF has approved $2.6 billion or 2.6 thousand millions, so billions is in English, right? It's not millions of millions, it's thousands millions of dollars in projects in total. Out of them, 900, almost 1,000 millions of dollars have been approved in land use sector. So we can, from this, we are already giving this, the information is to show you that it is already ongoing, finance is already there, but what we have found in this process of approving projects so far, we are not implementing. The GCF has only 2 years in actually approving projects, so we are yet to see the outcomes of these projects. But what I've been listening to the panelists is that there's already the experience and the capacity that need to be strengthened on the ground. So the projects that we are receiving still need to show how these investments will become transformational. In the GCF, we call it paradigm shift, meaning how we transform the business as usual towards a situation where there is empowerment of indigenous people with recognizing the role of women in the processes and so on. So these are very several elements that need to be in place in order to trigger this paradigm shift, empowering women, recognizing rights of indigenous communities, and one of the characteristics that is identified as a paradigm shift in the GCF is country-driven process. This needs to happen as a motivation and a process that is led entirely by the countries, and how in this process there is an engagement of all relevant stakeholders. There's as we know, in the land use sector has always been a fragmented sector where we have part of a government working on the environment or in forestry, another part working in agriculture, and all the other sectors are related, even education, health, transportation, infrastructure. But these are all fragmented when we look into projects. So the challenge is how, through these investments, we can articulate all these different sectors in a way that they are sound, at the same time provide all the environmental and social benefits that we want. Overall, I think that GCF is already, as I mentioned before, is open for business. We're already providing funds, but it's not all about financing. As we've been listening here, there is a lot of capacity building and strengthening the governance in the land use sector that would allow us get to this transformational change that is needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our panel wouldn't be complete without a perspective on science, and our last speaker in this first round is Professor Saiful Islam of the Bangladesh University of Engineering and Technology. And Saiful is going to speak to us about how regional climate modeling, hydrological impact modeling, and remote sensing applications can be mobilized in support of food security. And just before this meeting, you handed me a very impressive publication on these points. And without further ado, I would like to give you the floor to explain to our audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, panelists and audience. I think the question was how remote sensing, climate modeling, others can help actually the agricultural adaptation. I am actually water expert and look the changes of the global warming impacted water, and that actually eventually impacted the crop and agriculture. So I'm going to say that the two tools, remote sensing supported by the geographic information system and crop modeling, are the two powerful tools, highly complementary each other actually to predict the future changes of crop yield under climate change. So analysis remote sensing images provide useful information about the crop growth, while and yield, evaporation, evapotranspiration, and crop water requirements. On the other hand, the crop modeling simulation models, which used to predict yield based on the set of weather and climate data, crop characteristics data, and water management data. So both tools actually useful for the present and future cases. And remote sensing help extrapolated from set of characteristics data and water management, and based on some past correlation, we can use remote sensing tools to predict the future of the prediction of the yield. On the other hand, crop model, which actually extrapolation based on how process simulation where remote sensing can be a key factor. So crop modeling, remote sensing also help. So both these tools actually integrated and provided predictions that can spatial perspectives as well as stronger presentation of temporal processes. So it is very helpful. For crop yield forecasting has been started since 1970s to assist development countries for predicting food shortage and early prediction of the yield. SWAP, which is soil water atmospheric plant, the decision support system for agrotechnology transfer DSAT are among some of the most popular and widely used crop tool. These crop models can be simulated using the defined factors such as we can put the input on the crop model like carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, solar radiation, changes of the temperature, even changes of crop phenology, external limited factors such as salinity, water shortage or oxygen shortage, and reduce the factor such as changes of the weeds, pest, disease and pollutants. So then comes to how this model can predict the future. So that the question is, then we use the regional climate simulation. Why? Because the global model simulation, which often called as GCM, is very coarse resolution. So in order to downscale, regional climate model can bring now up to 25 kilometers fine scale information using the fine scale land use, topographic and soil classes. But the downscale data still have some biases. If you try to apply the regional model, you will find that your region, the data has lots of problems, issues. So that needs to be corrected by the bias correction. And the regional bias corrected climate model projections can be used for deriving data for climate simulation, crop simulation models. And then the hydrologic models, which also predict the changes of the water in the future. So both together can be used to assess the future climate change. It also, climate projections help you to understand the changes of the precipitation and the changes of the meteorological drought. You know, meteorological drought is, which is lack of precipitation. So remote sensing help identify changes crop yield, biomass production, using images from different spectral bands, applying retrieving algorithm and correction. For example, you might heard about the normalized vegetation index, NDVI, leaf area index, fractional absorbed photosynthetically active radiation, FPAR. Those are the index you can derive from the remote sensing images. And then based on this value of the indicators, correlation had been derived to predict the yield, evapotranspiration and crop coverage area. So this information is very helpful and useful for driving the possible changes present and also using as input to the future climate model. So we also need the variables of weather, temperature, rainfall, radiation, that also applied these crop models. Now comes to the uncertainty. We drive some future prediction of the yield, but that remains also uncertainty is a problem. Uncertainty is there. Two kinds of uncertainty. One is the climate itself uncertain, how will be in the future. And second is the modeling uncertainty, because there are also different algorithm, different scenarios. So these two uncertainty needs to be taken care. So if we use the climate data in seasonal scale, that reduces the uncertainty of the climate variability. On the other hand, if we use the data assimilation and the bias correction of the multimedia ensemble prediction, that reduces model result uncertainty. And now I'm going to talk about some of the results that we found from a project that I already mentioned. It's a high-end climate impact extremes funded by European Union. This is a regional project, also global scale projections. We have regional downscale data, multimodal ensemble bias corrected, and then we apply to the meteorological drought using standard precipitation and evapotranspiration index. We found that meteorological drought in the future will be increased and for Bangladesh. And similar results can be obtained for the drought in India. And however, applying this data, when we apply the hydrological model, we found the flooding will increase, but dry season flow will increase. That means the dry season hydrological drought will be reduced. So rainfall scarcity is one problem, another is the hydrological drought will be less. So it's a balance of. But the suggested that hydrological drought will be less severe in Bangladesh and surface water can be used for the dry season. By simulating crop model with the DSAT over Bangladesh, we found that main stipulated food, our main food is rice, Boro rice varieties, which will be decreasing in the future. And some cases it will be up to 25% reduction from the present condition. And at a high warming level, 4 degree, the increase of temperature actually offset the benefit from increasing carbon dioxide. So some people say the carbon dioxide will increase, so crop will be better. That's not the case actually. If you have 4 degree, then that's a big problem for crop yield reduction. And so apart from that, we also find from hydrological model that our floods, flash flood, and also we have a very flat country, sea level rise induced salinity will be into more in the due to global warming and pose severe threat to our agriculture. So we must act together to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases, such as global mean temperature should be well below 2 degree, if possible 1.5 degree, comparing to the pre-industrial level as agreed in the Paris Agreement. Even for an increased global temperature of 2 degree will harm our agriculture and need various adaptation measures, particularly for the developing, vulnerable countries, island countries. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saiful, and thank you for debunking en passant one of the narratives of climate skeptics, basically saying more CO2 is good for crop growth. It is not combined with a 4-degree world. So that's very, very helpful. Ladies and gentlemen, take a deep breath. That was a lot of information downloaded on you. We had the governmental perspective of the negotiations, we had the youth perspective, finance, the UN family perspective, indigenous women and science. So I have a lot of questions to the panel. I would invite you to think about your questions, and I would start while you are thinking about your questions, which from now on you can fire at any moment. Just raise your hand, and I'm happy to take you on. Thank you very much. Here's number 1 in the last row, and number 2, that spares me to ask the questions myself, and number 3. Do we have a roaming microphone where, if not, if you just come up here and ask your question, this is a small room, I'm happy to share the microphone. I think the first, yeah, here you are. That was question number 1, 2, and 3. Please, lady, you have the floor. Go ahead. It's working. It's working, yes.
Thank you. Is it working? Thank you very much, moderator, and thank you, panelists. My name is Doreen Othero. I come from Kenya, Nairobi. but I represent the East African community. I would like to thank all the panelists, but I would also like to say that I'm a medical doctor with a bias in women's health. I would like to speak to Ms. Hindu, Ms. Katia, and Mr. Juan. You rightly said that women can play a key role in improving agricultural practices. You rightly said that women need to be empowered, but you forgot to tell us how these women should be empowered. Is it only through training? My answer is yes and no. Women need to be empowered through family planning. A woman who produces a child every year cannot get time to meaningfully participate in sustainable land use practices. Women who have sexual and reproductive health challenges cannot meaningfully participate in what you have told us. Therefore, family planning, sexual, reproductive, and health rights of women need to be considered before they can be empowered meaningfully to participate in agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The second question goes to the gentleman in the front row, and then I give the panel, after the third question, the possibility to answer. Please.
Thank you very much. I'm Raymond Ryoka from Uganda and a member of Climate Smart Agriculture Youth Network. I have a question for Mr. Juan, the GCF. As young people, funding is paramount, and definitely how to access, our colleague mentioned how to do funding. But there's a concern with GCF, how young people can be empowered enough, because capacity building is important. So how has GCF triangulated funding and support for young people, innovation, climate change innovations, which young people are doing in climate smart, which is a challenge which has been happening. So what are you doing as GCF to reach resources? Because I know you work through governments, yet it's not easy to access resources. So how are you reaching young people with funding to empower them, build their capacity on climate innovations? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the lady in the first row asked a question. That was you with the iPad. You got the floor.
Thank you very much. My name is Elizabeth Kulugulu, and I'm also part of the Climate Smart Agriculture Youth Network. We had to live stream this event so that we leave no one behind. So I have some questions for you from the other youths that are not present here. I have a question which says, is it possible to introduce a market-driven model that offer a market for youth-driven climate-smart agriculture products? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and superbly interesting that you actually get in your constituency digitally and live, so we are much bigger than this room. Thank you for this perspective. Back to our panel. Sexual and reproductive rights for women, how much of an issue is that in the context of what we are discussing? Support for young farmers through the Green Climate Fund, or I might add through programs or governmental initiatives co-financed by the Green Climate Fund, and the question of market-driven models that would particularly encourage young climate-smart farmers to come in. Who wants to go first in answering? Katja, please go ahead.
I totally agree with you. I think women from all journeys of lives, class, ethnicity, race, geographical location, we do not live one single issue. We live lives that are holistic and with all issues. And I think empowerment of women has to do with building awareness, building self-confidence, building understanding of how to create choices, and have the ability to access power and resource, which is about power sharing. It's about having the access and control over resources and over actions that will build the structure and institutions that will be enabling them to live a fulfilling life, which is access and secure land rights, which is access and secure quality education, access and secure family planning. I think it's all of the above, and I'm so glad you are in the room to raise that such important question that's also dear to my heart.
Fantastic, thank you. Would you like to add on, Hindu?
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, you said women are producers and women are transformer of all the food that we are eating. And then if we take the example of Africa, we know that women are the most producer than men. So that's mean we need also to give them the equal chance for training, yes, but they already have knowledge. Because if we take indigenous women, they have a lot of knowledge on food security, food sovereignty, and the different species that's very adapt and sustainable for environment. So how we can benefit from the women knowledge, not only build them capacity, but how those women can build the capacity of others. And that can help this sharing. And if we give them the equal right to learn, and that can give them much capacity to produce better and to feed them family, but also to access to the market. Because this linking me directly to the use questions that who say, if we create access to the market, is it going to resolve? Actually, what is happening in our communities back home on the grassroots? Agriculture is becoming a very marginalized activities. Everybody want to just go to school and then go to the office and gain the money, because no one giving the value for agriculture and no one like helping the youth to restore the land or give them technology to do a better innovation in order to product. Because youth in the rural area, they want also the dignity and then they want the development. Why not giving them more technology, more training, and also for women? And why not using the knowledge that exists, giving them money? Maybe like GCF can do a window open for women, for youth on the rural area where they can access this funding and have the sustainable agriculture. They will stay where they are. All when we see, sorry to be long, but when we see like migration, most of them are young. Why young people migrating? They're migrating because there is no activities. If we value the agriculture that they have, they want to keep them dignity with them identity together. No one want to be and get shame and running in the cold because they are coming from hot, or running to the hot because they are coming from cold, because there is no value of what they are doing. And that is very important, I think, to invest on this way, and that can keep peace, can keep food, and can give better job to all the young peoples and women, because women are the one who are raising the young, and then who become a man.
Thank you very much. I'm giving the floor to Juan in a second. Just to let you know, we have enough time for a second round of questions, and while Juan is answering on the financial side, GCF, and the way you're working by country-driven demand, I would also encourage you to think about your next question. Give me a show of hand, and after that we could immediately go to your next questions. But now over to Juan.
Yes, actually I also wanted to make a comment on the first question, because GCF is a climate fund, and we need to respond to investments that will address climate change and adaptation and mitigation. And I look into the forestry and land use projects, and one time I received a proposal, very interesting, which they correlated family planning process in order to reduce deforestation in a country, which makes perfect sense. If you have less pressure because of population growth, you have more pressure on forests. But then if you go the other way around, you have less pressure on forests, and thus you will reduce deforestation. So there was a direct link between addressing climate change with the family program as well, not only, as you said, not only for empowering, but also as a climate change mitigation possibility, which I found very interesting. In terms of what GCF does for youth, probably I would guess it's the other way around. I guess that the solutions need to come, as Mr. Devine was saying, the innovation and defining what are the most alternative solutions. I think that youth have much more advantages in order to find this innovation. Now we see that we have been in the financing land activities for several decades, and we don't see that many changes on the ground. And I think we all working here in the land use sector, we were aware of that. We have been, all financial institutions have been in cooperation for many years, and when you go back to the ground, you don't see many changes. By the way, I'm 17 years not in climate finance, I'm a forester. So I've been 17 years as a forester, so I've been in the ground as well. And and we know that now climate change is also a factor of time. We need to find solutions very quick in order to address climate change, and we see the impacts already on the ground. So I think that it's more the other way around, as I was saying, is youth having innovation, this fresh mind, and all the access to information that probably 10 years ago we didn't have, and people who are already not as young as you are may not have the same absorption capacity of that information to find innovative solutions. So actually we would welcome a more active role of young people bringing solutions to climate change.
Thank you very much, Juan. Anyone from the panel wants to react to the first set of questions? If not, I would give the floor to the lady all the way in the back and then to the lady in the middle here. Can we get a microphone to you? Here, this way, all the way on the right-hand side.
Hi, my name is Pauline, and I have a question regarding if you can give a concrete example. So my dad is a farmer, and similar to other farmers, he also went to the capital to find work. And I think the question is if you have concrete examples of how you were able to encourage people to stay in the agricultural sector, and especially for women.
Okay, thank you. And the second question goes to the lady just in front of me and then to your neighbor to the right.
Thank you very much. My name is Özgül Erdemli. I'm from Tema Foundation based in Istanbul, Turkey, and also a member of the international platform called DryNet. My question is going to be addressed whichever the panelist wants to tackle or wants to respond, but it's about the sources of funding. When we talk about projects or funding, we tend to focus on international fundings or central government's fundings, and this is the case in my country as well. But more and more, when we are talking within the UNFCCC framework, we know that since Paris Agreement, since 2015, cities also have a role, non-state actors also have a role. And also considering the fact that the majority of the population, world's population, will be living in cities by 2050, how would you see the importance of cities in tackling issues related to food security and related to agriculture as well, but also within the framework of the need for assistance, financial assistance? Can cities be a sort of solution, or can cities be actors to provide solutions to food security within their boundaries, larger boundaries?
Thank you very much, and please pass the microphone just to your neighbor on to the right. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Melanie. I'm a political scientist. First of all, thank you so much for these great speeches and for all the great input we got today. And I was wondering, you were all talking about the empowerment of women, especially also indigenous women, which I think is a very, very important topic. So I was wondering, how do you address cultural differences that are, especially in some countries, a great obstacle to the empowerment of women? I was wondering if you could give us any enlightenment on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will have one more round of questions, so if you could hold your question to the next round, and I would ask the panel to answer these three questions. Basically, how do you keep young people in agriculture? What's the incentive? How can you make agriculture more interesting? The second question about the role of cities. Cities as suppliers of food. We had excellent initiatives here on urban farming, but also the connection of the cities and the hinterland, the urban food nexus. And the third question about the cultural differences and how do you create a culture that is actually empowering women, if I understood you correctly. And who wants to go first to answering? Divine, please start, and I always appreciate if a man is also taking the floor on all these gender questions. Juan, also thank you to you for that.
Thank you as well. So I'm going to respond to looking at the youth perspective of how we actually retain young people into our culture. How we are trying to encourage them. One of the key actions we are actually doing is to share best practices. We try to map out some of the youths in the rural communities actually doing much, having success stories. We are looking at agribusiness. What are we doing? We are going to these communities, try to tell young people that agriculture is not for the less educated or the old or whatever, but that the young people are the key factor in ensuring that food security is addressed and actual nutrition security. Reason being that young people actually, by 2050, the world will be made up of young people. So if their capacity is not built in this area or this sector, it's going to be very, very hard. And Africa, having 65% of arable land, so we have a lot of potential energy, and we are sharing this with young people. So we are equally encouraging young people by sharing some good practices in community levels. We take examples in Kenya. Yesterday, we were having a side event, and they actually shared what they were doing in Kenya for other countries to learn, for other young people to see what other young people are doing. And this actually makes things much more interesting and attractive. And we equally looked at the institutional and material support. How are the young people in the communities, are they dressed when they are doing farming? Because we are letting them know that when you go to a medical doctor, the final solution, he's going to tell you, take this drug, but you need to eat well. And we are telling them, please, why don't you be the end chain of all these concepts? Because if the doctor tells the patient, take these drugs, but you need to eat well, then it's better for you to go and begin to produce more food, because many people get sick and you have to be feeding these people. And that's a potential area for employment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Tanya, please, you wanted to respond.
Yeah, thank you so much. Regarding how to keep activities in terms of agriculture, and people working on that, what we have been seeing in our experiences is like access to information is key, access to climate information for decision making as well, and the inclusion of the different groups in the decision making process as well in the developing of adaptation plans at community level as well. So is what kind of information, what kind of organization we have to do in the ground with the community in order to achieve this. The identification, the proper identification of the right risks, vulnerabilities, but also the answers, the activities that will address those vulnerabilities and those risks and enhance resilience capacities. We have been working in different countries with a community-based participatory approach for the developing of adaptation planning processes at local level. But the inclusion of the different sectors that are involved in the area that we are working on, and the inclusion of key actors, but also the authorities, local authorities, help us a little bit in order to keep the sectors alive in those areas. And we see in a couple of years how the restoration, for instance, of land has helped, to have a very good impact in terms of food security and nutrition in those populations as well. So it's access to information, access to rights, access to every single tool that is improve the capacity of the local stakeholders to make decisions and design the programs and implement the programs that will help them to enhance the resilient capacity. That's also a very good experience that we have been seeing in the ground.
Thank you very much. Saiful, you also wanted to add in.
Yeah, I'd just like to add about the question about the change of culture. Actually, it has changing over the times. In Bangladesh also, women are doing agriculture is not very common, but last 10 years we found many changes, and here IFAD is there. They have implemented many projects in Bangladesh where I think we call LCS, labor contracting service, where the most destitute women who are poor and vulnerable, they work in the agricultural sector, infrastructure development, and we found it is much better even than men, because they have, with a small price, they can take care of the many things in the field and particularly flood and other seasons. So I think things are changing, world is moving forward, and there is a big hope that women can participate in the development process, particularly adaptation process.
Thank you very much. I want to open the third and last round of questions, and you've been waiting patiently for the question. Can we have a microphone to the lady in the first row? Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. So my name is Amanda Namai. I'm also part of the Climate Smart Agriculture Youth Network, and there's a lot of activity that's going on online, and they're very interested in what you have to say. So one of the things that I'll throw back to the panel, and it was related to the last question on culture, and I'll tie it to the sexual reproduction education. It's also tied to the culture, because in Africa, the more children a man has, the more prestigious he is considered. So how do we tie those two factors together? Because if we are to have the sexual reproduction education for the women, we also can't ignore the role of the man, especially in the socio-cultural setup in the community. Thank you.
Great question. Who wants to answer that question? And I have also one question I would like to ask before this panel is over. But who wants to go first on the question? Please.
Can I address a question of culture? I mean, in my experience working in the field, we work from a perspective that women's land rights is from a human rights based, and we do take into account an understanding that, and also understand that the legal rights really change and it's jeopardized given social practice norms and cultural and also religious norms. And that's where the hard work is, because the legal empowerment, the legal understanding from the women's perspective and the different approach that different communities use is very important. One is, first and foremost, to also engage men to find male champions. They understand that securing land rights for women increases and enhances the capacity of resilience of the women themselves and of the family as a whole. So there are several different strategies that are used. First and foremost is the group discussions be led by leaders among themselves, and sometimes even church groups bring in the discussion of the importance of securing land rights as an element to kind of demystify the stigma, because sometimes even the women that are self-confident and empowered to claim a public role and bring the discussion to communities where there is a stigma of the women trying to secure the land rights within that setting, especially in customary setting, it's breaking the family or it's creating unintentional discord. So that is one way of building champions within chiefs, within community leaders, religious leaders that understand and see by real examples of other communities where the security of even the tenure within the community tenure system, it's very important. And I have a very good example. For instance, I worked in a project in Tanzania for 8 years, and we worked with Maasai women's organizations, which the core work is education. And through that process, we brought in the land rights as an issue, as something of concern for the community. And to go through the whole understanding with the community, with in the barasas of men and women understanding that there was the Village Land Act that could get the women coming to groups of women or in family and understand to go through the process, equip them to claim and get the land certification. That gave security, not just for the groups of women that went through the process and did that, but also gave security for over 8,000 families and communities. And this was outside in Arusha, in Longido. This is one example. So we have several examples out there that can be raised up to scale. We have several land TUNET instruments that kind of measure the gender dimensions of how land legislations, land reforms, land process can be implemented in a way that ensure the rights of men and women equally. So I just...
Thank you very much. Anyone else wants to comment? Hindu?
Just I mean, now these questions of culture and it's coming often. I give you just a concrete example what we did in my organization. Coming from indigenous peoples is really like not easy in the indigenous community like mine. It's like a man-driving society. So it's patriarchal. And then like women do not have any word to say. So we work on it by using a strategy because climate change do not affect man only or woman only, but maybe more women are affected badly than men. So what we did is calling like a meeting, but we go to the community and we just sit with our chief, who is your grandparent or something like that. You sit down and you start explaining to him, asking him about what is happening and how the community facing the climate impact. And after that, you ask how I can talk to the women, because this issue is not only important to the man, but it's important to the women also. And the next day, we do not do the job like going from house to house. They do it themselves. Everyone go back home, and then they ask the woman, may you meet with Hindu tomorrow at 9, please? And then the job is done. When we come, we start talking about the serious issue. Then we start talking about them health, themselves. So reproduction health, we talk about them kids, how they raise them, did they have time, what they want to do with them life. And then you engage a real discussions. So after that, we say, okay, it's fine, we talked with the women. Why not having meeting women and men? Of course, at the community, never they will sit down like this, women and men together. So for the first time, we had that women sitting in one side, man in one side. And we start asking the question and discussing with the man. And after that, we said, do you want to hear from women? Women shying because they never did that, but you have some courageous women who can stand up and say, yes, I wanted to talk about this, about that. And we ask the man to confirm. All the men at the end, they shut up. They want to listen, they just shut up. And then the women talk. And you start that in a very basic way, but they understood. When they go back home, before the next day meeting, then everything becomes like a discussion between the couple. The next day you come, all of them exciting to open the mouth and want to discuss. And they found the solution for the community. Just one joke that I have, when like we go back and then we call the community, hey, we are coming to have workshop with you. Say, oh, you are coming to revolutionize our women's? So you see, they say that as a joke, but it's really encouraging. So this is how we are breaking the culture, the religious things, to put the community together fighting climate change is very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think, well, it deserves an applause, I think. You half answered the question that I'm having in the sleeve all the time. And if you allow me, I would like to ask this question and give every one of you 1 minute, not more, that's exactly what we have, to answer. And the question is actually something that Juan mentioned. They said the basic problem, if I quote you right, is the fragmentation. You're constantly having different constituencies. Everybody is well-meaning, but you don't get them together. So, Hindu, you have answered that, because it seems to me after this session that giving women the right position, the right situation, is actually helping to deal with the complexity, because many of the issues really relate to women's position in society. But to the other panelists, what do you think? We agree on a vision of a world in which nobody needs to be hungry, and a world in which global warming stays well below 2 degrees. we are all of goodwill. We have different sectors here on the panel, and I think I heard again and again, we need to, how can this be done? How do we deal with the complexity? How do we get these different groups to talk together to get to this result? And Saiful, can I start with you and then go from right to left? Then please, you got a minute to answer the big question.
Okay, I will talk about I'll emphasize about the water security, which is a big issue for many countries, and particularly also the conservation of water, water sharing, water management among the transboundary rivers of the country. Sharing that is a big challenge for food security, and possibly some research on the drought-tolerant variety, flood-tolerant varieties of crops that needs to be easily accessible, and seeds and water technology in the developing countries, because this not only the money and cash or helping the society, but also technological help on the adaptation is very much needed, because adaptation has a tipping point, and countries like us, Bangladesh and developing countries, they need some new innovative improved yield varieties technology. We are doing research, but some help is essential, because that also improve your food security, improve your crop yield, because huge challenges we are facing.
Saiful, thank you. Water, the bracket that holds it together. Katja, what's your answer?
Sorry, the vision. Well, I think there is two parts to the vision that I'm going to talk about. One is the fact that right now we have the Paris Agreement. We have international policy frameworks and guidelines that clearly provides the direction of how to achieve this goal. We have the Paris Agreement that has the fundamental priority of safeguarding food security. We have the 2030 agenda that it's really clearly is a global unprecedented framework that it's stating and showing how security land rights is actually foundational for several challenges in development. It's linked to Goal 1, Goal 3, Goal 5, Goal 11, Goal 15. Can even also promote security, peace and security. And we have the voluntary guidelines on the governance of tenure, fishery, and forest. So the vision is how to ensure at national level those policy frameworks are actually implemented in a holistic, integrated way that makes sense, and really tackle the structural barriers that is consistently perpetuating a unsustainable food system that is based on industrial food system, and including the livestock industrial system. Então, then policies and frameworks that are gender responsive, and it's really promoting and shifting the system to a system that is more based on agroecology, and is based on traditional crops. It's based on a framework and actions that are promoting and enhancing the diversity of the agriculture based on the crops and the knowledge of indigenous people, and also, of course, always integrating the gender dimensions. I think that's what I would envision.
Thank you very much. That's a fantastic work. Gender-sensitive land rights, agroecology, respect for indigenous peoples, and food systems that actually guarantee biodiversity and fairness, I might also say. Hindu, your minute to wrap it up.
I think all is said, but what is important here is how all this can be right-based approach, and then empowering communities back home, especially listening from the indigenous peoples in order to keep all the species that we have who can feed the peoples and sustain the land, and that can be the good examples. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tanya, from the UN family, your vision.
What we have seen is the integrated approaches, integrated and comprehensive solutions to a very, very complex problem in the case of climate change. It's no one single intervention will be help. But if you think about the whole problem as a, you know, with the whole dimension and trying to have a overall picture, you will see like how we can link the science to make better investments in the ground. For instance, this is the very basic concept of climate smart agriculture as well, but also it's like trying to see how innovation can help the land sector in general terms. And I wanted just to relate to the question about the cities and the funding opportunities as well. It's like the science and the all interventions are helping us to, for instance, innovate in the financial mechanism. And nowadays we are talking about forecast-based financing, risk transfer mechanisms that are taking place to protect farmers against drought, for instance. But we have been able to design this kind of interventions based on different aspects to how to read the problem and how to try to bring different solutions in order to develop this product as well. So integrated approach will be the basic to address a very complex problem of climate change.
Thank you very much. Juan, foresters invented the concept of sustainability. What's your vision?
Okay. Well, to the answer, I think that after Paris, we're already on that way when we see that in most of the NDCs, and you know much better the numbers than me, it's how many countries have included land use in their NDCs?
We are talking about roughly 90% if you look at mitigation and adaptation.
So that's already I think that we're already on that road. If 90% of the countries have already included land use activities in their NDCs, which are also embedded in the development plans of the countries, that also will reflect on what you asked me before. That's a paradigm shift already. Countries are taking land use activities where all this, what has been discussed, where assuring indigenous rights, empowerment women, and so on, is embedded into that. So I see that that's already been materialized, and as long as we continue that road, we might get there. Thank you. And also, sorry, I need to apologize because I'm double booked. My panel already started 5 minutes ago, and I have to go to another session, and I just want to thank you for the invitation. I have to run now.
Thank you very much. We got 1 minute, 48 seconds. Divine, use them, and then over to Tekini.
Yeah, I think we need to, as my colleague, as the UN system, as was underscored, we need an enabling environment for young people. We need to look at young people as partners, not as beneficiaries, meaning that from implementation, from developing proposals right up to implementation, they have to be part of it. They have to sit on steering committees. And we see climate smart agriculture as a way to go because it addresses mitigation, adaptation, and equally improving on food security. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Tekini, the last word to the presidency of this.
Thank you very much. I have food waste. I think it's recorded in the FAO booklet. As an agronomist, I strive to achieve food security for my community, and it hurts me to see food being wasted. So dreaming of a world without hunger, if international bodies can strategically plan the amount of food that is being wasted globally, is enough to probably enough to reduce hunger in other parts of the world. So food waste is also a great and big topic that we have to look at. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tekini. And with that, a big hand to our fantastic panelists. Thank you for following with us and for your great questions. Keep going for 3 more seconds and we have a point landing. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. That was excellent.